What's the most freaked up thing you saw at a sleepover? Not me but a friend. When we were 14, she went to a girl's house for a sleepover. Girl's dad let them hang out in the garage and drink beer. Later my friend was sitting outside alone, and the dad came out and started talking to her. Then he tried to kiss her, and as she backs away, the mom walked out and caught him. She started screaming at both of them and told my friend she needed to leave. She was 14 and drunk, and the girl whose house it was told her mom that was bullshit and she was staying. My friend said she couldn't sleep all night. The next morning the mom took my friend alone into the bedroom and apologized and said they were having marital problems and he had cheated on her before. Hopefully it wasn't with any other kids. When I was about 15, there was a couple in my cousin's congregation that offered to host a sleepover for some of the teen girls. I was staying with my cousin at the time, so I went with her to their house for the sleepover. When I got there, I realized that this couple only had one kid, and it was a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The couple set us 5 teenage girls up in the basement. It was furnished and carpeted, not a creepy basement, and the wife set out a bunch of snacks, and then we didn't see her or the little boy the rest of the night. But the 30-something dad spent most of the evening with us, offering us sips of his Kahlua drink and leaving the liquor cabinet doors open when he would announce that he was going to another room. I was creeped out, but I was so sheltered at the time that I didn't understand why exactly until years later. It's nothing that I saw, but more like something that happened to me. I was 13 when I stayed over at my friend's house for the night. We were up pretty late playing video games and eating snacks. I got thirsty, so me and my friend went to the fridge to get a bottle of Coke. When I opened the bottle, the soda shot straight up my face and got all over my white shirt. I asked my friend if I could shower since I was pretty sticky from the soda. Once I got out the shower, I noticed my friend and his little brother were knocked out in the living room sofas. By the way, I had no shirt on since the soda ruined mine completely. That's when their aunt came through the front door and saw me. She got close to me and started to rub her hands around my chest and shoulders. I was completely shocked and stayed still. Then my friend's brother woke up and saw what was going on. She stopped touching me right away and said, "Oh, I thought you were my nephew." Then went straight to her room and never came out until I left the next morning. Even if I were her nephew, why the hell would she touch me like that? To this day I wonder what would have happened if my friend's little brother hadn't woken up. My friend's older brother would get mad at her for small things, went in his room, lost the TV remote, shut her door too loudly, and proceed to beat the crap out of her, pull her hair, and hold her down, and punch her in the sides, literally throw her across the room. He was almost 10 years older than us, and easily had 100 to 150 pounds on her. He would eventually tire from the beatings, leave the room, and she would go back to playing with me like nothing happened. I remember being so unbelievably shocked by it, but eventually became desensitized because of how normal it seemed to her and how unfazed she was by it. I remember we did a secondary school bonding thing in our first year, where you effectively go to a summer camp for the weekend with the whole year group, about 211-12-year-olds, to get to know everyone. Sleeping arrangements were in dormitories with bunk beds, separated by gender, about 30 to a room. Lights go out in my dorm, no teachers, just 30 11-12-year-olds that don't know each other that well. A kid farts. Hilarious. Someone else farts. A few others. Then, I vividly remember a distinct sloppy sound followed by a panicked "oh." A kid shat himself. I would also like to note, this was not the only public pants shitting by this kid. He did it again final year during our Duke of Edinburgh award expedition overnight whilst camping. I was sharing a tent with him. That's a whole different story. I saw porn for the first time. We were watching movies on my friend's TV and fell asleep watching. Must have been on Cinemax or something, because I woke up in the middle of the night. It was a porno of man and woman in the shower. That was really awkward since I was 13 and hadn't experienced anything like that. I was too scared to turn it off because her parents were up in another room and I didn't want them to know I was awake. So I pretended to be asleep. I eventually fell back to sleep, but it took forever. The worst was her parents fighting. They would yell, curse, hit each other, and were always drunk. What's the most freaked up is I stayed there so often that it became sort of normal to me. I didn't like it, but it wasn't something I could stop. I had so many weird and inappropriate conversations with her drunk mother. Conversations about me and my friend's sex lives or about her problems. The worst was when he shoved her into a metal pole and it bent. I didn't see it happen, but that pole was like a twisted monument to the violence that regularly took place. All the sleepovers there in my teens messed me up more than I thought. If I told my parents the whole truth of how bad it was, I don't think they would have let me sleep over. When I was 12, we went on a family trip to Vegas. I woke up in the hotel to my parents having sex in the bed next to me. I was trapped and had nowhere to go. My mom said something along the lines of, "Stop, we are gonna wake up the kids." My dad gets up, walks over to our bed and rips the blankets off our faces and said, "See, fast asleep. I should have won an Oscar." The dad's mistress came over. Apparently the mother knew of her existence and it had been putting a strain on things. My buddy and I hid in the basement while the wife and mistress were screaming at each other upstairs. Shockingly did not cause a divorce. When I was in elementary school, I got invited with my sister to a birthday party of one of her friends. Everything was going fine for most of the night, and then the catastrophe happened. Her mom came down to the basement and was clearly very upset, but didn't explain why. She then had each of us line up on the stairs from the basement to the ground level of the house and brought us in one by one. I wasn't the first in line, but no one was telling us what happened once it was their turn. Finally I was up, and her mom took me into the bathroom and showed me a trash can with a poop in it. She was basically on the verge of tears, pointing to the trash can and asking me, "Is this your poop? Is this your poop?" It wasn't. We never found out whose it was, or at least I wasn't told. We have joked that someone will finally come forward on their deathbed, but my sister and I have since lost contact with those girls, so we may never know. I was 13 to 14 and staying the night at a friend's house with 2 other girls when we were woken up by a loud popping noise from her brother's room. Naturally 4 curious girls went to see what the hell he was doing at 3 in the morning. Her mom came running up the stairs about the time we entered his room and quickly herded us back out of his room in hysterics. It took my brain forever to register that he had shot himself in the chest. Luckily he survived, and I never had another sleepover at someone else's house again. Plenty of nightmares though. When I was like 9 or 10, I spent the night at a friend's house. I knew his mom was pretty strict, but holy crap did I find out how much. He did something really minor like leave his socks in the living room and she started shouting at him like he left a turd on the floor or something. Then he pissed her off again that night and she wailed on his ass so hard that it scared me. She was a psycho the way she was spanking and shouting at him. I hated her guts after that night. My mom screaming at us for covering the kitchen floor with water and dish soap at 2 AM so we could go skating. At the time I really couldn't understand what she was so upset about. But, Mom, we are helping clean. When I was in the 6th grade I was going to stay the night at a friend's house, but we ended up at another kid's down the street. This guy ended up talking about how he would hump his bed until there was a wet spot on his boxers. He ended up doing this while we were in the room watching TV and then showed us the wet spot. And that was how I learned how to jerk off. Kid who had a pee jar in his closet. It was a gallon pickle jar. If he had to pee in the middle of the night he had to use the jar. Once his mom put us in his room for the night, we weren't allowed to leave his room until she came to get us the next morning. How did they make sure of that? The doorknob was turned around backwards so they could lock us in. Holy crap, my inbox. Okay, the jar was for emergency use only and was emptied and washed in the morning if he used it. Probably rarely used it since most kids that age can hold it all night. He was a bad kid and stayed in trouble. Pretty sure the lock thing was to send him to his room and make sure he stayed there. Don't know about the parents' sexual habits, but I'm not surprised that most of Reddit immediately jumped on the drug-fueled Dodgers responses. I had a friend whose dad had a fish tank of piranha. I really wanted to feed them a hot dog, but her dad told me they already ate. During the night I snuck down to where the fish tank was, and there was picked clean fish bones in the tank. The dad was down there watching football, and he spotted me and asked if I still wanted to feed the piranha. Being a small piranha obsessed child, I nodded and produced the hot dog I saved from the barbecue dinner we had. It was the most terrifying and awesome thing I have ever saw. 10/10ths would never want to watch 3 piranha go at a hot dog ever again. Least not in person. I'm so sorry you'll have to suffer the mental image of this, but it was a classic high school sleepover. We ate tons of junk food and drank a good amount of smuggled beers, after which friend 1 suggests we sneak into the community pool to go skinny dipping. We were all pretty reckless, so it came as a surprise when friend 2 vehemently opposed the idea. He absolutely would not budge for the longest time. Of course, we eventually bullied him into compliance, as HS kids do, climbed the fence, dropped our drawers, and went for a dip. Unfortunately for us, it must have been a full moon that night, because despite the lateness of the evening there was still enough light for us all to see. To our horror, the aptly named friend 2 began releasing stream after stream of projectile diarrhea just moments after we all got in the pool. And yes, it looked exactly like what you're undoubtedly picturing in your mind right now. We also completely neglected to bring towels, so we ended the night with a long, wet, cold, and completely silent walk back to friend 1's house. The next morning, friend 2 pretended to have blacked out from his 2 beers and claimed he had no memory of the event. We are still friends to this day, and hilariously enough he is now my gastroenterologist.